Hello class. Today we're going to talk about mean absolute deviation. So let's define that. First thing we know about mean, okay, because we've calculated it before, mean means the average. Okay, and to find the average, you add up the numbers in your data set and you divide by how many numbers you had. Absolute is referring to absolute value. Well, absolute value of a number is always its positive distance away from zero. Okay, so absolute value is going to be positive. Deviation means distance from the center, or in this case, it's going to be distance from the mean. So when I say mean absolute deviation, what I'm referring to is the average positive distance a number is from the center or from the mean. Okay? So the actual textbook definition is something like this. Mean absolute deviation, or MAD, of a data set is the average distance between each data value, or each point in our set, and the mean. The mean absolute deviation is a way to describe variation in a data set, or how spread out the data set is. Okay, so there's 3 steps in finding mean absolute deviation. The first step is you must find the mean of all of your values. So that means you add them all up and divide by how many there are. The second step is we're going to find the positive distance each number is, or each value is, from the mean. So we subtract the mean from each value, or each value minus the mean. And we want the positive distance, so we don't pay any attention to the negative signs in front of the numbers. And then the third thing we do is we find the mean of those distances. Okay, so let's look at an example, and then we will do 2 of them together. So the first one, we have a set of data. It says find the mean deviation of 3, 6, 6, 7, 8, 11, 15, and 16. So, this data set, we don't really know where it came from. You could say that it may be shoe sizes, because those could all be shoe sizes. So the first thing we do is we find the mean of our data. So I'm going to take all these data points and I'm going to add them together. 3, 6, 6, 7, 8, 11, 15, and 16. You add those together, you get 72. So then you divide that number by how many data points there are. Well, there are 8 data points, so we divide by 8. So 72 divided by 8 is 9. So the mean is 9. Now what we want to do is find the positive distance each value is from the mean. So I'm going to do 3 minus 9 and get negative 6. But I don't want the negative part, so I'm going to just say 6. And then 6 minus 9 is negative 3. So I just want the positive distance of 3. And I do that with each of the values. So step number 1, find the mean of the data. Step number 2, find out how far each data value is from that mean by doing the value minus the mean to get its distance from the mean. The third step then is to find out what is the average distance. So we take those distances, we add those together, we divide by 8 again, and you end up with 3.75. So the average distance a number is from the mean, okay, like each one of these values, we had a value of 3 and a 6. The average distance each one of those numbers is away from that mean is 3.75. So that tells us that the variation in the data, it's not very spread out. Okay, the smaller that number, the tighter the data set. The bigger that number, the more spread out your data is. Okay, so let's look at an example. Here's our first example. Again, this is exactly what your assignment will look like as well. Okay, so you will be given a chart like this with a set of data. So the first thing I want you to do is take this data and write it in our chart. So we would have 10, 7, 13, 10, and 8. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this data and we're going to find its mean. So I'm going to add each of those together and divide by 5. Okay, so we would take our calculator and we would type in 10 plus 7 plus 13 plus 10 plus 8 and get a sum. So our sum is 48. Now to find the mean of that is I need to divide that by 5 because there's 5 data values in our set. So 48 divided by 5 gives us 9.6. So then for my mean, I'm going to write 9.6 for each one of these. Okay. So then I'm going to take my data and I'm going to subtract my mean from it, or vice versa, whichever one you prefer. So I'm going to do 10 minus 9.6 to get 0.4. We'll do 7 minus 9.6 to get negative 2.6. I'm going to do 13 minus 9.6 to get 3.4. We're going to do 10 minus 9.6 to get 0.4, and 8 minus 9.6 to get negative 1.6. Now I'm going to take each one of these differences and I want to calculate its positive value. So I'm just going to copy each of these values over again and make them positive. So 0.4, 2.6, 3.4, 0.4, and then 1.6. Now to find the mean absolute deviation, I now need to find the average of these distances because I want to know the average variation in my data set. So I add up each of these values, and when I add that up, I end up with 8.4 for my total. Then the count is just how many numbers are there. So I put in 5. So 8.4 divided by 5. So we find this average distance. So I divide these two numbers, 8.4 divided by 5, to get the mean absolute deviation, which in this case is 1.68. And that is how you calculate mean absolute deviation. So let's try one more. Pause the video and you try it on your own. Okay, so let's find out how you did. Okay, so the first thing, we copy our data down. 110, 114, 104, 108, 106. Now we add these values together and we divide by 5 again because we've got 5 data sets. So when we do that, we end up with a value of 108.4. We write that all the way down. Now we subtract our data from our mean, or vice versa, data minus mean, and you get some values. So our difference here is 1.6, 5.6, negative 4.4, negative 0.4, and then negative 2.4. So those are our differences. Now I want the positive difference. So again, it's 1.6, 5.6, 4.4, 0.4, 2.4. Now, we add these differences together. Okay, so I add that together and I end up with 14.4. Okay. The count again is how many numbers I have. So I have 5. And now we take those two numbers and we divide them. 14.4 divided by 5 gives us 2.88 as our mean absolute deviation. So again, the mean absolute deviation is just the average positive distance a number is from the center or from the mean. Okay, and there's 3 steps in calculating it. Step number 1, find the mean of the values. Step number 2, find the positive difference each value is from the mean. And then last but not least, find the mean or the average of those distances. And that's how you calculate mean absolute deviation.